Hi. So a quick overview, a 30,000 foot view of ISO 27001 and what it is and what the major components are so that you can get your head around it. So the first thing to know is that it is a framework and a standard for an information security management system, or what we call an ISMS. It helps organizations manage sensitive data securely. Think of the ISMS as a central repository for the policies, procedures, people, systems, and the risks that go around your data. So you're considering what data you're handling, who you're handling it for, and what the appropriate level of controls for your business are. Because it is not the same for a small business that potentially runs a greengrocers and handles customer data versus a large corporation like a multinational bank or something like that that is handling financial data for potentially millions of people. So 27001 is the same standard for both, but it's applied very differently for those different types of entities. And it integrates with your organization structure to support continuous risk management if you pull away and look at its heart. So the construction end of 27001, it's in two real parts. You have the clauses and the controls. I'm not going to go through the clauses in great detail here, but just to know there are 10 clauses that lay out things like leadership and having a policy, risk management and planning, change, all the way through to continual improvement. Whereas the controls are in the back in an annex called Annex A, and there are 93 controls in 4 groups. And these controls ask you how you are going to approach certain things. So for example, organizational controls about roles and responsibilities. Who's going to manage your information security? People controls are about potentially doing background checks on employees coming into the business, and what level of background check is right for you. Is it a quick reference or a passport check, or is it a criminal record check? But that is for you to determine what's right. And then we've got the physical controls. It's about securing your offices and working premises. And then you've got the technological controls. What malware solution do you have? What is your backup regime? And it asks you to consider all these things and say whether they're applicable to your business or not. And if they're not, then you don't have to address them. But mostly they are going to be applicable to your business. And you will have to say how you address them and how you make sure that those controls are working. So the main components then of an ISMS, and therefore ISO 27001, we start with the scope. So the scope asks organizations to define the ISMS and the data boundaries, if you like. So we're talking about physical locations like offices, business processes that might be involved. You might say accounting's involved and HR, but not customer service. That might be unusual, but then you might choose which business functions fall within scope. You'll also be looking at the IT systems and the data that you're processing, and that will determine a large part of what your scope is. And I always recommend starting with a smaller scope when you get your first opportunity to implement 27001, because it saves you from overcomplicating it and bringing in procedures where you don't need to necessarily bring in procedures. For example, you might say, we're going to just focus on this customer product, and we're not going to worry about employee data at this stage. We'll pick that up next time around, because you can always improve and change the scope in later certifications. Okay. Leadership commitment is really important because you need to show that top management are involved, and that this isn't something that's just handed off to a junior employee and they're left to get on with it. It must have sponsorship, and there need to be kind of objectives that are set by the senior management team. It says, right, this quarter, this year, information security, we're going to implement these things. And a simple objective might be, we're going to get 27001 certification this year. So all of the information security should be integrated into your daily business operations, and you should be able to evidence that when you go to audit. At its heart, I believe 27001 is a risk management exercise. It's about stepping back, asking yourself how much risk your business can tolerate. Some organizations are highly risk averse. If you're working with health data, you're highly risk averse, and others are a bit more casual and they will take risk, but potentially within certain parameters. So it's for you to look at your business, look at the risks that potentially are there around the data that you're handling, and then say how you can address them, or whether you can accept them or put in a mitigation measure or take insurance or things like that. So you've got lots of opportunities to approach risk, and you have to come up with a treatment plan saying, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to minimize risk to my business. Next is compliance with laws and regulations. So it's really important that you are aware of what obligations you have, both in terms of regulations and laws, which are not quite the same thing, but also in terms of contractual obligations that you've made to customers about security. So an obligation might be to a customer that you ensure that you have 27001 and a updated certificate that's live and independently audited. So there are different things that you need to look at, like GDPR and HIPAA and all these kind of things, and say, do I have to take notice of these laws around me? And if so, how does it shape my information security? So you need to bring those into consideration. The last major aspect is continuous improvement. So like any ISO standard, like 9001 or any of the others, they're constantly asking you to reflect and then improve. So there's a common improvement cycle called Deming's improvement cycle, about planning a change, doing it, putting it into action, checking how it's gone, and then taking any corrective actions that you need before you go back to the planning stage and take the next improvement and put that in place. So where you might start on day one in ISO 27001 is not where you want to end up in 10 years' time with ISO 27001. They will be very different because of that continual improvement and push to change. And I would say that for anybody approaching their first year in 27001, you want to target minimal viable compliance. That's trying not to overdo it, but make sure that you get through your audit. You don't want to be building castles in the air and anything that is way too complicated for you to continue to manage. You want to make small incremental improvements year in and year out so that your ISMS is nowhere near where it started when you first got certified in terms of maturity. I hope that helps.